Okay, so today's Tanya today is Lag BaOmer, the 18th day of the the 18th day of Iyar, and it's a fascinating Tanya because what the Tanya discusses is the idea of what we call Tzimtzum, how much God kind of concealed himself in order to come to us. So we don't realize, like we take it for granted, that God, let's say, speaks to man. God said the 10 Commandments. But in the end of the day, it's like if I'm speaking to you, okay, it's not a big deal. One human is speaking to another human. But imagine if I was the other side of the world and I decided, okay, I need to speak to you. You're a great guy. I have to speak to you. So what would I have to do? I literally have to get on a plane, travel the other side of the world. If I was an ant and I was very determined to speak to you, I'd have to crawl for 100 years and then somehow hitch a ride over. So in other words, the way that the distance that you have to travel would be quite great. Now, from God to man is an infinite distance because God is without any limitation and we are limited. So that means when Hashem comes to us, the famous thing is he has to contract his light because his light is infinite. If he just was there in his presence, nothing else could exist. So he had to create what's called mainly three tzimtzumim, three major contractions, which is the world of Bria, the world of Yetzirah, and the world of Asiyah. And these three contractions, what they do is they diminish the divine light. So in the highest world, if you exist in the world of Atzilus, they say about the world of Atzilus, Hu levadei hu ve'ein zulase. In this world, it's like there's nothing but Hashem. It's like that's clear, Hashem alone. Then the next world, the world of Bria, we begin to have what we call yesh ma'ayin, the sense of an independent existence. It's kind of like this radical break from the spirituality that creates the physicality. So the people in that universe, in the physical, I can't exactly call it physical, but whatever bodies they have, are very, very cognizant. First of all, they're cognizant of themselves. In fact, it's a world, there's a famous teaching, it says, I think, therefore I am. But of course, the question is, who is the am that is thinking? But there's a certain premise to that if I'm thinking, there is somebody that is thinking. And that's a very deep thing, because if I'm thinking, in a certain sense, it's not God thinking, it's me thinking. That means there's somebody else operating this brain or this body or this will, whatever this soul is. And so the fact that you can have something besides God is a miracle, because in the world of Atzilus, the soul sees itself not as a separate entity, as a one entity. In fact, we find with Malachim, they're called Malach Michal, Malach Gabriel. And they're called these names because they are actually, they kind of have the name Hashem. So you have like Kel at the end, Gabriel, Michal, Raphael, Uziel. Now, they actually have two names. They have a name which has Hashem, and then they have a personal name, like a stage name or something. And the reason they have this name with Hashem is they'll actually talk in the name of Hashem. Malachim will come and they'll say things like, it's amazing. The angels come to Abraham, they say, okay, well, we will turn over the city, we won't turn over that city. But they're just messengers. How can they make these decisions? The answer is that they're so, the Shekhinah is so with them, they're so identified with Hashem, that they can do these things. Now, the truth of the matter is that the souls, the beings, perhaps I don't really know that much about it. It's a complicated subject. It seems like our soul has different levels, and in different levels we can exist in different worlds. But be that as it may, depending on the world is how much self you have. Now in this world we have a lot of self, because in fact, like the Rebbe says, what defines a human being is the sense of self, which in a way is good, because if a person doesn't have a sense of self, they have a problem. So self is very, very important. But the idea is that for Hashem to come to, even though we may think of ourselves as important, in the actual fact, we're like nothing. We're like a tiny, finite zygote. Literally, I met the professor who actually was the first person to measure the size of a zygote. That's the embryonic cell, which when the sperm and the egg meet, the first cell is a zygote. So, he measured the egg. Well, I guess it would be the same size. The human egg is 1/5. I think it's 1/5 of a millimeter. If you think about a millimeter, it's tiny. 1/5 of a millimeter. It's tiny, tiny, tiny thing. And that's where we began. And we even didn't. Before that, our body didn't exist. Like the first, I don't know, month or so, it's like tiny. It's almost microscopic. So Hashem made us out of nowhere, and then I think I mentioned this thing. My brother-in-law once said that one of his daughters were born. He says, like this little baby's in the air. He says, and soon she's going to be expecting things, So that's the way we are. Like, okay. And Rabbi Twersky has this thing. It's the day of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. I'll put on my hat because it's a holy day. Maybe we'll get some holy chassidus this day. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai revealed the chassidus, the highest levels. So basically, Rabbi Twersky has this idea where this lady, she's on the beach, and her kid gets swept away by a wave, and she starts crying, Hashem, Hashem, my kid, save my kid. And a wave comes and gently puts the baby, and she looks at the baby and she says, Hashem, you had a hat on. So we're the story of the guy in Jerusalem. He's looking for a parking space. He says, Hashem, if I get this parking space, it's the most important meeting of my life. 10% of the meeting I'll give to charity. In that moment, a car pulls out. He says, Hashem, don't worry, I found the parking space already. Right? So there's the person who's in desperation, he's it says in the Gemara, actually, there's nobody that's a bigger believer than a sailor. Because a sailor, his mama, they're dependent on the winds and the water. You can imagine a sailor in the olden days as well. It's like they were the believers of believers. So what do they say? There's no atheist in a foxhole. So it's only that Hashem gives us a good life. So we're what about this? What about that? So, be that as it may, the main point of this today is this. It's all about this meditation of feeling a reciprocal love to Hashem. Now, before we had spoken about if somebody very great comes and loves you, you'll love them back. But imagine if this person, for his love for you, let's say you have a king and he owns, 100 countries. The guy's amazing. So on one hand, if he comes to a person who's kind of any person, he takes him in, he loves him and he hugs him, especially if the person was down and out, the person would love the king. But what if you do the reverse? For the king to come to this person, he had to give away all 100 countries. There's a law, if the king leaves the country, he loses the country. So he travels through 100 countries. He leaves the whole thing just to be a friend of this person. The person would be like, wow, this guy really loves me. This is it. So in a similar way for Hashem to come down to us, it's like Hashem literally comes out of infinity. He contracts his infinity like himself to get to the finite point. So from the infinite to the finite is like an infinite jump. And he did that just because of his love for us, because we are the ultimate of his desire. Us, Yidden, people down here in this world, the whole thing was made for us. And as the Alter Rebbe says, because we are the ones that have this ability to give ourselves to God. And ironically, it has to be like this, because a soul or an angel in heaven, they just know that God is reality. So of course they're going to give. But we really have free choice because we don't see that. And so when we decide, we give our lives to Hashem. Now, the last thing he says is that when you can meditate on how great this love is, then you should be willing to give up everything. That's what we say in Shema. V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha. You should love Hashem b'chol levavcha, with all your heart, even the Yetzer Hara, b'chol nafshecha, with all your soul, b'chol me'idecha, with all your resources. In other words, he says that there should be nothing, even a wife, kids, nothing that is more important to you than this love. Because ultimately, it's kind of my teaching that a person has many desires. So the question is, which desire wins, right? I have a desire to take a hike, or I have a desire to take a walk, I have a desire. So the answer is the desire that you desire the most. And so this is really, as Jews, why it's so important to awaken our love for Hashem. Because not that a person doesn't love Hashem, everybody loves Hashem. But the question is, do you love cupcakes or chocolate more? Because it could just be at this moment, the cupcake to me is more important because that love I take for granted. But the cupcake, I don't, because if I don't eat it, it's going to get stale. So the point is that a person has to, and this is the whole idea of Tanya, this is the whole idea of davening, which is we reawaken our love for Hashem in the davening. Kind of did this exercise today, which I've done once or twice. It's very powerful. It just, I guess it depends on the individual, but just pointing to the davening, it really helps you focus, it really keeps you on track. So, so this is the story. L'chaim v'levracha.